For nearly 2 decades, a rotating cast of scrappy, mud-caked kids ruled American movie screens. They squabbled in backyard clubhouses, staged homemade circuses, and turned mischief into an art form. Our gang, later syndicated as the Little Rascals, made stars out of toddlers and grade schoolers, and for a generation of moviegoers, these children felt like family. But childhood stardom in the 1920s and 30s came with almost no safety net. There were no unions protecting young performers, no long-term financial planning, and no roadmap for what happens when the cameras stop rolling on a 6-year-old. What follows are the real, well-documented lives of the kids behind some of the gang's most beloved characters, the triumphs, the hard luck, and in some cases, the genuinely tragic endings that followed them into adulthood. Carl Dean Switzer was born on August 7, 1927, in Paris, Illinois. He and his older brother Harold were local singing sensations before a family trip to California changed everything. A visit to the Hal Roach studios turned into a screen test, and by 1935, 8-year-old Carl was cast as Alfalfa, a cowlicked, off-key crooner whose cracking singing voice became one of the show's most quotable running gags. Switzer's popularity soared through the late 1930s, at times eclipsing even Spanky as the face of the series. But like most of his castmates, he aged out of the role Hollywood loved him for. He picked up smaller parts in films like The Human Comedy and It's a Wonderful Life, but steady work dried up, and Switzer supplemented his income bartending, training hunting dogs, and guiding hunting trips for clients that reportedly included Roy Rogers. In 1954, he married Diane Collingwood. The marriage produced a son but ended in divorce a few years later. On January 21, 1959, a dispute over a $50 debt tied to a lost hunting dog brought Switzer to the Mission Hills home of his sometime business partner, Moses Bud Stilts. A violent altercation broke out, and Stilts shot Switzer once in the abdomen. Switzer died at the hospital that night at just 31 years old. A coroner's jury ruled the shooting justifiable self-defense and no charges were filed, though decades later, in 2001, Stilts' own stepson publicly disputed that account, claiming Switzer had actually been leaving when he was shot. The case was never reopened. Switzer is buried at Hollywood Forever Cemetery, not far from several of his former castmates. Born October 2, 1928, in Dallas, Texas, George McFarland was cast in the series at just 3 years old and quickly became its de facto leader, the sharp-tongued, suspender-wearing ringleader whose confidence anchored the gang for most of the 1930s and into the 40s, including the feature General Spanky. Unlike many of his co-stars, McFarland managed a relatively stable adult life. He married twice, raised children, and spent decades working outside the entertainment industry, including a long stretch in restaurant management and later public relations for a food company, while also making the rounds of nostalgia conventions and our gang reunions, where fans still lit up at the sight of him. He was famously good-natured about being recognized for a role he'd played as a preschooler. McFarland died of a heart attack at his home in Grapevine, Texas on June 30, 1993, at age 64, a long life by the standards of his cast, and one spent largely at peace with the character that made him famous. William Thomas Jr. was born March 12, 1931, in Los Angeles and joined the series at age 4, eventually becoming Buckwheat, one of the most recognizable and beloved characters in the show's history. When our gang ended its run, Thomas made a deliberate choice. Rather than chase a fading acting career, he moved behind the camera, spending decades working as a film technician at Technicolor. He married and had children, living largely outside the spotlight, even as reruns kept his childhood face famous to new generations. In the summer of 1980, Thomas attended a star-studded Hollywood tribute honoring the Our Gang cast and received an emotional standing ovation. 10 weeks later, on October 10, 1980, he died suddenly of a heart attack at his Los Angeles home. He was 49. Born January 1, 1925, near Los Angeles, Matthew Beard joined the cast at 5 years old as Stymie, instantly recognizable in his oversized derby hat, and helped support a household of 13 siblings with his earnings. As the roles dried up in his teens, Beard fell into serious trouble, arrests, a spiraling heroin addiction, and years cycling in and out of jail. What makes his story remarkable is the second act. Beard eventually entered Synanon, a residential drug treatment program, and got clean. He rebuilt a real career, landing guest roles on Sanford & Son, Good Times, and appearing in 1978's The Buddy Holly Story. In January 1981, just after his 56th birthday, Beard suffered a stroke and a bad fall that led to serious head injuries. He died of complications on January 8, 1981. He was buried with his signature derby hat. Darla Jean Hood was born November 8, 1931, in Lede, Oklahoma, and became the gang's leading lady at age 4. Her singing voice and easy charm, especially her on-screen chemistry with Alfalfa, a defining part of the series from 1935 to 1941. As an adult, she kept performing, fronting a vocal group, singing in nightclubs from the Copacabana to the Sahara, and doing voice work well into the 1970s, including the 1979 animated Little Rascals Christmas special. She married twice and had 3 children. In June 1979, while organizing a long-planned Our Gang reunion, Hood checked into Canoga Park Hospital for a routine appendectomy. During the operation, she received a blood transfusion that was later found to have been contaminated with hepatitis. She died of resulting heart failure on June 13, 1979, at just 47. An ordinary surgery turned into an entirely preventable tragedy. Fellow castmate Billy Thomas, devastated by the news, would himself die a little over a year later. Norman Chaney was born October 18, 1914, in Cambridge, Maryland, and unusually for the mostly very young cast, joined the series as a young teenager in 1929, playing the slow-burning, put-upon chubby. His size was central to his comic persona, but it also masked a real and serious medical problem. Chaney had a glandular condition that caused him to gain weight uncontrollably, reportedly reaching over 300 pounds while standing under 5 feet tall. He left the series as the condition worsened. In 1935, doctors at Johns Hopkins put him through an aggressive treatment that caused his weight to plummet dramatically, a crash that put severe strain on his heart. Norman Chaney died of myocarditis on May 29, 1936, at just 21 years old. His grave went unmarked for 76 years, until a fundraising campaign in 2012 finally provided a headstone for him and his mother. Jackie Cooper was born September 15, 1922, in Los Angeles and joined the gang at age 7, quickly becoming one of its most emotionally expressive young performers before moving on to a major career as a child star in features like Skippy, for which he received an Academy Award nomination at age 9, still the youngest competitive nominee in Oscars history. Cooper later wrote candidly about the harsher realities of the studio system, including an incident on the set of Skippy, in which director Norman Torog manipulated him into crying on camera by falsely telling him his dog had been shot. Unlike most of his castmates, Cooper's career never really stopped. He transitioned into a long, successful run as an adult actor and later as a director and television producer, most famously playing Perry White in the Christopher Reeve Superman films. He married 3 times and found lasting stability with his 3rd wife, Barbara Krause. Jackie Cooper died on May 3, 2011, in Santa Monica at age 88, the longest-lived and most financially successful of any Our Gang alum, leaving an estate reportedly worth roughly $18 million. William Laughlin was born July 5, 1932, in San Gabriel, California, and joined the cast in its final years as Froggy, instantly identifiable by his raspy, croaking voice, by his own account, simply an exaggerated version of a voice he liked to do for fun. After Our Gang wound down, Laughlin didn't chase a Hollywood comeback. He tried a few auditions, appeared briefly in Johnny Doesn't Live Here Anymore, then told his mother acting wasn't the life he wanted. On August 31, 1948, Laughlin was riding as a passenger on a motor scooter while delivering newspapers in La Puente, California, when the scooter collided with a truck. He died of his injuries hours later. He was 16 years old. Robert Bobby Hutchins was born March 29, 1925, in Tacoma, Washington, and joined the series at just 2 years old as Weezer, the tag-along little brother eager to keep up with the older kids. As a young man, Hutchins joined the U.S. Army Air Forces, training as a pilot. On May 17, 1945, days before he was set to graduate from flight school, his aircraft collided with another plane during a training exercise at Merced Army Airfield in California. He was killed instantly. He was 20 years old. Alan Hoskins was born August 9, 1920, in Boston and became, at age 2, one of the earliest breakout stars of the series as Farina. For several years, one of the most prominently featured child actors of either race in American film, at a time when that kind of billing for a black child performer was genuinely rare. Hoskins reportedly earned as much as $350 a week during the height of his popularity, an extraordinary sum for a child performer in that era. He served in the U.S. Army Air Corps during World War II, married, and raised 2 children largely away from Hollywood. Post-war opportunities for him in the industry were limited, and in the 1950s he moved into social work, spending much of his later career helping young people in rehabilitation and mental health programs. Alan Hoskins died on July 26, 1980, in Oakland, California, after a battle with cancer. He was 59. Dorothy DeBorba was born March 28, 1925, in Livermore, California, and joined the cast of Five as one of the series' sharp-witted young leading girls in the early Sound era. After leaving acting, she worked for years as a secretary, married twice, and raised 2 children, a quieter, largely private life outside the entertainment industry. In her later years, she developed emphysema. Dorothy DeBorba died on June 2, 2010, in Walnut Creek, California, at age 85. Scott Hastings Beckett was born October 4, 1929, in Oakland, California, and joined the gang at 5 as Spanky's mischievous sidekick. Beckett kept working steadily as he grew older, appearing in Battleground and the TV series Rocky Jones, Space Ranger, but his adult life became increasingly chaotic. 3 marriages, mounting legal trouble involving alcohol, gambling, and bad checks. In 1959, a car crash left him with a fractured skull and broken hip, injuries serious enough that he reportedly needed a wheelchair and crutches for a period afterward. He survived a suicide attempt in 1962. In May 1968, after sustaining injuries under circumstances that were never fully clarified, Beckett checked into a Los Angeles nursing home. He died 2 days later on May 10, 1968, at age 38. The official cause of death was never conclusively determined, and his troubled final years remain one of the more genuinely murky chapters in the cast's history. Taken together, these are not uniformly cursed lives. The reality is more complicated, and in some ways more human than that. Jackie Cooper lived to 88 and built a second full career. Spanky McFarland and Dorothy DeBorba lived into their 60s and 80s, largely at peace with the fame that found them as toddlers. Others, Alfalfa, Darla, Chubby, Froggy, Weezer, Scotty, were taken far too young by violence, medical misfortune, accident, or hard living, in stories that remain genuinely affecting more than 80 years later without any need for embellishment. What connects nearly all of them is the strange weight of having been famous before they understood what fame was, and the very different paths each of them found, or didn't, once the cameras moved on to the next generation of kids. Which of these stories surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this look back at the real history behind the Little Rascals,